Welcome to episode 4 of the Zech Support Legal Studies series. Today's episode, we will be focusing on causation, a crucial concept in criminal law that establishes the link between a defendant's actions and the resulting harm. Without causation, there is no criminal liability. By the end of this episode, you will understand the difference between actual cause, the but-for test, and proximate cause. You will also understand how intervening causes affect criminal liability, what happens when multiple parties contribute to a crime, how courts determine foreseeability in criminal cases, key legal cases that shape causation in criminal law, the role of policy considerations in proximate cause determinations, how different jurisdictions interpret causation laws, the importance of causation in homicide cases, and how causation applies in tort law versus criminal law. Let's dive in. What is causation in criminal law? Causation is the legal principle that links a defendant's voluntary act to the social harm that occurred. The prosecution must prove causation beyond a reasonable doubt to establish criminal liability. Causation is divided into two main elements. Number 1, actual cause, or cause in fact. The direct cause of the harm determined using the but-for test. Number 2, proximate cause, or legal cause. This determines whether the harm was foreseeable and whether the defendant should be held legally responsible. Let's go deeper into actual cause using the but-for test. To establish actual cause, courts use the but-for test, which asks, would the harm have occurred but for the defendant's actions? If the answer is no, then the defendant's act is the actual cause. For example, Deanna fires a gun at Victor, who dies from the gunshot. But for Deanna shooting Victor, would Victor have died? No. Therefore, Deanna's act is the actual cause of Victor's death. Here is an even more complicated example. Deanna poisons Victor's drink, intending to kill him. However, before Victor drinks the poison, he is struck by lightning and dies instantly. But for Deanna's actions, would Victor have died? Yes, the lightning was the actual cause, not Deanna's poisoning attempt. Acceleration theory. A defendant can still be found liable if their actions accelerate the harm. Example: Victor has been stabbed by Deanna and will bleed out in 2 hours. Before this happens, Daniel shoots Victor, killing him instantly. Even though Victor was already dying, Daniel accelerated his death, making him the actual cause. Substantial factor test. In some cases, courts use the substantial factor test to determine causation when multiple causes exist. For example, if Deanna and Daniel both independently start fires and the fires combine to destroy a building, both of them could be held liable if each fire was a substantial factor in causing the destruction. When multiple parties contribute to a crime, courts analyze whether each act was independently sufficient to cause the harm. For example, Deanna stabs Victor in the stomach, and medical testimony shows that Victor would have died in 2 hours. Shortly after, Daniel shoots Victor, and the medical experts conclude Victor would have died in 5 hours. However, Victor dies within 1 minute due to both injuries. Both Deanna and Daniel are actual causes because their actions contributed to the victim's death. If an act substantially contributes to the harm, it can still be considered an actual cause even if other causes exist. Proximate cause and the legal causation test. Even if a defendant's act is the actual cause, they may not be criminally responsible unless they are also the proximate cause of the harm. The key question: was the harm a foreseeable consequence of the defendant's action? Here's an example of foreseeable harm. Daniel drives recklessly through a red light and hits a pedestrian. It is foreseeable that reckless driving could lead to an accident, so Daniel is the proximate cause of the harm. Here is an example of unforeseeable harm. Daniel punches Victor, knocking him unconscious. While Victor is unconscious, a third party robs and kills him. Since that third party's actions were not foreseeable, Daniel is not the proximate cause of Victor's death. Causation in homicide cases. Causation plays a key role in homicide prosecutions, particularly in felony murder and manslaughter cases. For example, the felony murder rule. If Daniel were to rob Victor's grocery store, and Victor was to have a fatal heart attack due to the stress, Daniel could be liable for felony murder if Victor's death was a foreseeable consequence of the crime. Another example is assisted suicide. If Daniel provides a gun to Victor, who then shoots himself, is Daniel the proximate cause of Victor's death? Courts often rule that voluntary independent actions like suicide break the chain of causation. Here is one more example. Defendant was operating a boat while intoxicated. The victim, who was also drunk, jumped off the back of the boat and drowned. The defendant was charged with vessel manslaughter while intoxicated. Was the defendant the proximate cause of the victim's death, or was the victim's own act an independent intervening cause? The court would rule that the defendant was still liable because the injury was foreseeable. Drunk individuals taking reckless actions is a common consequence of intoxicated boating. The main takeaway here is that if the harm is a foreseeable outcome of the defendant's conduct, they remain the proximate cause, even if the victim contributed to their own harm. Understanding causation is essential in criminal law. It helps determine who is responsible for harm and who should be held legally accountable. Courts use actual cause, proximate cause, foreseeability tests, and policy considerations to make these decisions. That's it for today's episode. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and stay on the right side of the law. And remember, when you need help, you can always call Zech Support.